next level, genetics. DNA base ratios. AT to GC ratios. In other words, if you take a cell from a chimpanzee and a cell from a human and break them down to the AT plus GC ratios, you will find they're different. In fact, quite a bit different. So they must not be the same genus and species. They might be somewhat close, but they're not the same. What told us? Genetics. But guess what? We didn't have genetics until 1950. So until 1950, we had to use that. And in our class, we still use this. How many genetic tests do you see on those cards? None. All right, what happened in 1999? Whole chromosome mapping.
Is that the Human Genome Project?
That was the completion of the Human Genome Project. In other words, we can look at individual genes of two organisms and see how many individual genes they have in common. Wouldn't that be closer to truth than anything else we've ever used before? Yeah, you could tell how closely related two organisms are. Are they the same genus and species, or are they slightly different by what genes they have? But when did we have this information? Not till 1999. So taxonomy has improved since actually Aristotle, I don't even know what that was. This was 1969. And this is 19, oops. All right, so by getting better and better techniques, we have got what we think is better and better answers and a better and better hierarchy of taxonomy. Remember, as we get better techniques, we'll get better answers. And we think we come close by comparing genes of individual organisms. Now, that's what we're using now. So, once you get this hierarchy, remember the hierarchy is, if I hand you a cell, which is easier, putting it in a kingdom or putting it in a species? Kingdom. I hand you something, you can ask me 2 questions and put it in the right kingdom. Does it have a cell wall? No, it's animal. Yes? What's it made of? You can put it in the right kingdom. It's very hard to take 2 organisms and say they're in the same species unless you watch them have sex. If they have sex and make progeny that are not sterile, then they're probably in the same species. It's very hard to do. So remember, as you go down this, it gets more and more difficult to put things in the right spot. And this is our system, our hierarchy of classification. The highest level is kingdom. And then, of course, remember, if you're a plant or were once a plant kingdom, the second level is divisions. Animals, the second level is phylums. And then you go to class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, what is scientific naming? If you put any living thing in the correct hierarchy, all you do is take the genus name plus the species name, and that becomes the scientific name. If I ask you what scientific naming is, you will say it's a binomial system of naming where we use genus plus specific epithet. Now, someone in the first class says, hold it, you said species. Now you're saying specific epithet. Which is it? The correct answer is specific epithet. What is a scientific name made of? Genus plus specific epithet. What is it? Genus plus the species name. Why do we use two different words there? Same reason you ask when you ask your mama. Because I said so. Why? That's just because. Just remember, the specific epithet is the species name. But if you're referring to the two parts of a scientific binomial, a scientific name, it's genus plus specific epithet. Now, there is subspecies. Now, in humans, we don't like to call each other subspecies. My goodness, you look like a subspecies today. In fact, just by observation, you couldn't get true subspecies, which we call races. I doubt if we'd find anyone in here, if we went into your genetics, is pure one race or the other. We're all kind of All right? So, anyway, this is the classification hierarchy. And we're going to go back and just talk about scientific naming just for a second. Remember, it was first proposed by Linnaeus. It assumes that you put things in the correct place in the taxa using the best mechanism you have. Once you get it in the right place, and remember, we're assuming that simple led to complex over time, then you can take the scientific name. And what is the scientific name? The genus name plus the specific epithet. Okay? If you're writing it, what does that mean? Well, if I write Staphylococcus aureus, that is a scientific binomial. And when you're handwriting it, you have to underline it. The genus name is always capitalized. There is no exception. The species name is never capitalized unless it begins a sentence. So if I say, I gave you unknown number 16, and you put on the title of your paper, unknown number 16 was identified as Staphylococcus aureus. That's the title of your paper. Aureus is not capitalized. If you say in your discussion, aureus was the species that I discovered by unknown number 16 was, then it is capitalized because it began a sentence. But that's the only case. Not even in a title is a species capitalized. So don't forget that. Now, what if you're typing? If you're typing, a scientific name can be underlined, italicized, or bold, or any combination. Most textbooks will just italicize. Some will bold and italicize. And I've seen some that just go completely overboard. Underline, bold, and italicize. So, it doesn't matter, but here's the rule. It has to stand out from the text around it. So remember, scientific names are always underlined or stand out from the text around it. If you're handwriting, it's always. Is there anything else about that I want to? I don't think there's anything else I want to say. Okay, we did that. Okay, so anyway, from Aristotle to 69, there were two kingdoms. And it was based on plain old observation, with the cell wall or without. And then, in 1969, Whittaker came up with this, well, let's just analyze the cell wall. Simple microscopic observation and simple cell wall chemistry was how we got the five-kingdom system. And I'm sure you learned the five-kingdom system, didn't you? Everybody does. You start in grade school, and then you go to junior high and high school, and all the way even to your freshman year in college, you learn the five-kingdom system. Why do we teach it? Because it's easy. Very easy. In 3 questions, if I hand you a cell, we can put it in the correct kingdom, right? First question was, does it have a cell wall or not? If the answer is no, animal. If the answer is yes, what's it made of? If it's chitin, fungi. If it's peptidoglycan, Monera. If it's cellulose, plant. So it's incredibly simple to use and very intuitive and obvious. And when you were learning it in high school, then they go, today we're going to talk about how all life is organized. And it's organized into 5 kingdoms. And the microscopic bacteria The simple cells are in the kingdom of Monera. But we're going to talk about things that are interesting to us, which is the complicated cells of the 4 other kingdoms: plant, animal, fungi, and protists. Blah, 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 blah. And that's the only time in your whole life anyone ever mentioned Monera. Right? Did they talk more than 2 sentences about Monera? No. You know why? It's a lie. They were lying and they knew it. That's why they didn't talk about it much. You know, my ex was a sheriff of an entire state, Brazil. And he said, let me just tell you something I've learned in 25 years of interviewing murderers, rapists, thieves, the dregs of humanity. The more complicated the story, the more likely a lie. So we didn't want to go much into Monera, because we would have to tell you things that you would have to unlearn, because we know it's a lie when we teach it. Now, why do we teach you a lie? Because we had a choice. Can you teach 3rd graders biochemistry? No. So the choice was teach something that's slightly wrong, but you don't have to explain biochemistry, or teach biochemistry so you can explain why that's not right. So we just let you believe that it's all right until you get to about sophomore level in university, and then we tell you it's a bold-faced lie, and we knew it. Because it's kind of slightly, it's pretty easy to unlearn something you know very little about. Isn't it? If you know hardly anything about it, it's pretty easy to unlearn it. Now, if you know lots and lots of details and you've memorized them, it's kind of hard to unlearn it. So that's why we didn't give you much in high school about Monera. All we said was, it's one of the divisions of life, it's simple cells, it's microscopic, and it's bacteria. Now let's go on to something else. And most of that's true. So, this was totally wonderful, still is taught. We teach it because it's very easy to unlearn it. Why? What do you have to unlearn? Just one thing, Monera. Monera ain't right. It's a lie. Everything else is okay. So, it's pretty easy. Alright, so what else? Well, as we got more and more into using better levels of hierarchy, by 1978, we got to this, actually between 1960 and 1977. Remember, we didn't have really any ability to do much with genetics until the 70s. And we didn't have anything to do with, we couldn't analyze individual and compare